Maria Thompson lived a life far removed from the glitz and glamour that most people associated with being married to one of the richest men in the country. Her husband, Ethan Thompson, was the CEO of a multinational tech conglomerate, a man whose name was synonymous with success, innovation, and wealth. Yet despite living under the same roof as someone who commanded boardrooms and dominated headlines, Maria preferred the quiet simplicity of an ordinary existence. She wasn't interested in designer clothes, luxury vacations, or high-profile events. Instead, she found joy in tending to her garden, volunteering at the local community center, and curling up with a good book on rainy afternoons. To Maria, life was about connection, not status. She believed that true happiness came from meaningful relationships, not material possessions. This philosophy had drawn her to Ethan when they first met nearly a decade ago. Back then, he was still climbing the corporate ladder, working long hours but always finding time for her. They bonded over late-night conversations about their dreams and aspirations. Maria admired his ambition, while Ethan appreciated her grounded nature. Together, they seemed like two halves of a whole, balanced and complementary. But as Ethan's career skyrocketed, things began to change. His once manageable schedule became a whirlwind of meetings, conferences, and international trips. The small gestures that used to define their relationship, like breakfast together or weekend hikes, slowly faded away. At first, Maria tried to adapt. She told herself it was temporary, that this phase would pass once Ethan settled into his role as CEO. But years went by and the distance between them grew wider. Ethan became more consumed by his work, while Maria felt increasingly invisible. Still, she held on to hope. Deep down, she believed that their love could withstand anything. After all, they had built a life together, a beautiful home filled with memories, shared laughter, and even disagreements that only strengthened their bond. Ethan might have been absent physically, but Maria convinced herself that his heart was still with her. Or so she thought. One chilly autumn morning, Maria woke up feeling restless. It had been months since she last saw Ethan face to face. He was constantly traveling, and when he did come home, he was either too tired to talk or preoccupied with emails and phone calls. Their interactions were brief and transactional, lacking the warmth they once shared. That day, however, something inside Maria shifted. She missed him, truly missed him, and decided to do something spontaneous. She called Ethan's assistant to find out where he was currently staying. When she learned he was at a 5-star hotel in the city for a week-long conference, an idea sparked in her mind. Why not surprise him? She imagined walking into the hotel lobby, flowers in hand, and seeing the look of delight on his face. Maybe they could spend some quality time together, just like old times. The thought made her smile, and without hesitation she booked a room at the same hotel. As Maria packed her bags, excitement bubbled within her. She chose a simple yet elegant dress, added a light scarf, and slipped a handwritten note into her purse. In her mind, this trip wasn't just about surprising Ethan, it was about reconnecting with the man she fell in love with. She wanted to remind him of the little things that made their relationship special, the way he used to hold her hand during walks, the inside jokes only they understood, and the quiet moments of understanding that didn't require words. The drive to the hotel was peaceful, the crisp air carrying hints of fallen leaves. As Maria approached the towering glass structure, she couldn't help but feel intimidated. The building exuded opulence, with its golden chandeliers, marble floors, and impeccably dressed staff. For a moment, she questioned whether she belonged there. But then she shook off the doubt, reminding herself why she had come, to see Ethan. When she stepped inside, the grandeur overwhelmed her. Everything gleamed, the polished counters, the ornate furniture, the perfectly arranged flower arrangements. Guests strolled around with an air of confidence, their expensive suits and jewelry marking them as part of a world Maria rarely ventured into. She felt out of place, almost like an intruder, but she pushed those feelings aside. All that mattered was reaching Ethan. At the front desk, Maria handed over her reservation details, expecting a warm welcome. Instead, the receptionist barely glanced at her before handing back the keycard with a curt nod. There was no smile, no polite greeting, just a cold efficiency that left Maria unsettled. She hesitated, wondering if she should say something, but ultimately decided against it. Perhaps this was simply how things worked in such exclusive places. Little did Maria know, her arrival at the hotel marked the beginning of a chain of events that would shatter her perception of her marriage and herself. As she rode the elevator to her floor, clutching the bouquet of flowers tightly, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The luxurious surroundings, the indifferent staff, and the growing distance between her and Ethan weighed heavily on her mind. Yet she clung to the hope that seeing him would make everything better. What she didn't realize was that sometimes hope can blind us to reality, and reality has a way of catching up, no matter how hard we try, to avoid it. After settling into her room, Maria took a few moments to freshen up. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out her dress and adjusting the scarf around her neck. She wanted to look presentable, not overly formal but not too casual either. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the bouquet of flowers she had picked earlier that day. They were Ethan's favorites, white lilies with a touch of baby's breath, and she hoped they would bring a smile to his face. With the note tucked securely in her purse, Maria stepped out of her room and made her way toward the elevator. The hotel corridors were eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional click of heels against marble floors. As the elevator door slid open, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. What if Ethan was surprised? What if he dropped everything and spent the evening with her just like they used to? When she reached his suite on the top floor, Maria paused for a moment to steady her breathing. She knocked gently on the door, her heart pounding in anticipation. Seconds passed, then minutes, but there was no response. Frowning, she knocked, again this time a little louder, still nothing. A wave of unease washed over her. Was he busy? Had he left the hotel unexpectedly? Or worse, was he avoiding her? Determined to find answers, Maria approached the hotel staff stationed near the elevators. "Excuse me," she said softly, trying to sound calm despite the knot forming in her stomach. "I'm looking for my husband, Ethan Thompson. He's staying in one of your suites. Could you please check if he's available?" The concierge, a tall man with an impeccably pressed uniform, gave her a dismissive glance before replying, "Madam, I'm afraid we cannot disclose guest information. Privacy is our utmost priority." Maria blinked in surprise. "But I'm his wife," she explained, her voice tinged with desperation. "I just want to know if he's here. It's important." The concierge's expression remained unchanged, his tone clipped and impersonal. "As I said, madam, we cannot assist you with that. If you'll excuse me." He turned away, signaling the end of their conversation. Stunned, Maria stepped back. She had never encountered such coldness before. Back home, people knew her as Ethan's wife, the kind, unassuming woman who preferred gardening to galas. Here, however, she felt invisible, as though her presence didn't matter. It was as if the staff saw her as an inconvenience rather than a guest, or worse, someone unworthy of attention. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Maria decided to wait in the lobby. Surely Ethan would return soon. She found a corner seat near a large window overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but Maria barely noticed. Her mind raced with questions. Why hadn't Ethan answered the door? Why was everyone treating her so poorly? And why did she suddenly feel like an outsider in her own marriage? Hours ticked by, each minute stretching longer than the last. Guests came and went, some casting curious glances in her direction. A few whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward her before quickly looking away. Maria tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the bouquet in her lap. The once vibrant flowers now looked wilted, mirroring her fading optimism. Finally, just as Maria was about to leave, she spotted him. Ethan emerged from the elevator, accompanied by a strikingly beautiful woman. Her sleek black dress hugged her figure perfectly, and her confident stride demanded attention. She laughed at something Ethan said, her voice melodic and carefree. For a moment, Maria froze, unable to process what she was seeing. This wasn't how she imagined their reunion. Ethan stopped mid-step when he noticed Maria sitting alone in the corner. His face paled, and for a fleeting second, guilt flickered in his eyes. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by irritation. Without sparing her a second glance, he turned to the nearest staff member and snapped, "Who let her in here? Get her out immediately." Maria's world crumbled around her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own husband, her partner of nearly a decade, was ordering strangers to remove her from the premises as though she were some nuisance. Tears welled up in her eyes as two security guards approached her, their expressions devoid of sympathy. "Ma'am, we need you to leave," one of them said firmly, gesturing toward the exit. I don't understand," Maria stammered, her voice trembling. "That's my husband." "We're sorry, ma'am, but these are Mr. Thompson's instructions," the other guard replied, cutting her off. Humiliated and heartbroken, Maria allowed herself to be escorted out of the hotel. The cool night air hit her like a slap, jolting her back to reality. She clutched the bouquet tightly, its petals bruised from her grip. How could this have happened? How could the man she loved treat her like this? As she stood outside the hotel, tears streaming down her cheeks, Maria replayed the events of the evening in her mind. The indifferent staff, the stunning woman by Ethan's side, and finally his cruel dismissal. It all added up to a truth she couldn't ignore any longer. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had changed. Maybe their marriage had been crumbling for years, and she had been too blind to see it. Or maybe he had simply stopped caring. For the first time in her life, Maria felt truly alone. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Yet amidst the pain, a small spark of clarity began to emerge. She realized that she deserved better than this, better than a man who couldn't stand up for her, even in front of strangers. She deserved respect, love, and honesty. And if Ethan couldn't give her those things, then perhaps it was time to let go. Little did Maria know, this humiliating encounter would set into motion a series of events that would change her life forever. While she walked away from the hotel, that night with heavy steps and a broken heart, she also carried something else, a newfound determination to reclaim her dignity and rediscover who she truly was. The night air was cold and biting as Maria walked away from the hotel, her tears mingling with the chill. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of what had just happened was physically pulling her down. She clutched the bouquet of wilted flowers tightly in one hand, their crushed petals a cruel metaphor for her shattered hopes. For years she had poured her heart into her marriage, believing that love could conquer anything. But now, standing alone on the sidewalk outside the gleaming five-star hotel, she realized how naive she had been. Maria didn't know how long she stood there, staring blankly at the bustling city around her. Cars zoomed past, their headlights blurring through her tear-filled eyes. Pedestrians hurried by, oblivious to her pain. The world seemed to move forward effortlessly, while she felt stuck, trapped in a moment that refused to fade. Eventually, she forced herself to hail a cab and head back home. The ride felt endless, every bump in the road jolting her already fragile emotions. When she finally arrived, she locked herself in her bedroom, curled up on the bed, and cried until exhaustion took over. The next morning, Maria woke up to a barrage of notifications on her phone. News of the incident at the hotel had spread like wildfire, thanks to social media posts from nosy guests who had witnessed her removal. Headlines screamed across tabloids: CEO's wife kicked out of luxury hotel, and did Ethan Thompson forget his own spouse? Photos of her sitting alone in the lobby looking small and defeated were plastered everywhere. Comment sections exploded with opinions, some sympathetic, others mocking. Strangers dissected her life as if they knew her, debating whether she was naive, foolish, or simply out of place in Ethan's glamorous world. At first, Maria avoided reading any of it. The shame and humiliation were too much to bear. But curiosity eventually got the better of her. As she scrolled through articles and comments, she noticed a recurring theme. People were fascinated by her simplicity, To them, she wasn't just another scorned wife. She was a symbol of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. Many readers praised her humility, contrasting it sharply with Ethan's arrogance. Some even called her the simple woman. Betrayed, a phrase that resonated deeply with those tired of superficial lifestyles. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself embroiled in a public relations nightmare. His carefully crafted image as a devoted family man and visionary leader was crumbling before his eyes. Board members questioned his judgment, investors grew wary, and the media painted him as a hypocrite. Desperate to salvage his reputation, Ethan issued a statement blaming the hotel staff for mishandling the situation. "This was an unfortunate misunderstanding," he declared. "My team is conducting a thorough investigation to ensure such incidents never happen again." True to his word, Ethan fired everyone involved in Maria's removal, from the concierge who dismissed her to the security guards who escorted her out. While some saw this as damage control, others viewed it as further evidence of his callousness. By lashing out at innocent employees, Ethan only fueled the narrative that he cared more about protecting his ego than addressing the real issue: his own behavior. For Maria, none of this mattered. She barely registered the headlines or Ethan's attempts to shift blame. Her focus was inward now, on healing the wounds that ran deeper than public opinion ever could. In the days following the incident, she leaned heavily on her closest friends and family. They rallied around her, offering support, encouragement, and a safe space to vent her frustrations. Slowly but surely, Maria began to piece together the fragments of her shattered confidence. One afternoon, while sipping tea with her best friend Sarah, Maria voiced something she hadn't dared to admit aloud. "I think I've been living someone else's dream, not mine." Sarah nodded knowingly. "You've always put Ethan first," she said gently. "But maybe it's time to figure out what you want." That conversation planted a seed in Maria's mind. Over the next few weeks, she started exploring hobbies and interests she had long neglected. She joined a local book club, where she met women who shared her love for literature. She volunteered more frequently at the community center, finding joy in helping others. And most importantly, she began journaling, a habit that allowed her to process her emotions and reflect on her journey. As the initial shock of the hotel incident wore off, Maria discovered something unexpected: strength. The betrayal had hurt her deeply, but it also forced her to confront truths she had ignored for years. She realized that she had stayed in the marriage longer than she should have, clinging to the hope that things would improve. Now she understood that hope without action was meaningless. If she wanted a better life, she had to create it herself. Ironically, Ethan's reaction to the fallout only reinforced Maria's decision to move on. Despite his public apologies and grand gestures, including sending expensive gifts and pleading letters, he couldn't hide the cracks in his facade. His calls went unanswered, his texts remained unread, and his attempts to win her back fell flat. Maria no longer saw him as the ambitious, driven man she once admired. Instead, she saw a man consumed by pride and fear, a man who valued appearances over authenticity. With each passing day, Maria grew more determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. She sold the extravagant house Ethan had bought for them, trading it for a cozy apartment downtown. The new space was smaller but filled with warmth and personality. She decorated it with items that reflected her true self: handmade crafts, potted plants, and shelves lined with books. For the first time in years, Maria felt like she belonged somewhere. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual too. She stopped seeking validation from others and focused on nurturing her inner peace. Meditation became part of her daily routine, helping her stay grounded during moments of doubt. She also reconnected with old passions like painting and gardening, which brought her immense joy. Through these small acts of self-care, Maria rediscovered the person she had buried beneath layers of compromise and sacrifice. By the time autumn gave way to winter, Maria was unrecognizable, not because of outward changes but because of the light that now radiated from within her. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that drew people to her. Friends remarked on how much happier she seemed, and strangers complimented her warm smile. Even Ethan, who occasionally tried to reach out, couldn't help but notice the difference. The woman he had dismissed so carelessly was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more self-assured. Looking back, Maria realized that the humiliating encounter at the hotel had been a turning point, not just in her marriage but in her entire life. It had stripped away illusions and forced her to confront hard truths, but it had also given her a rare gift: clarity. For the first time, she understood that simplicity wasn't weakness, it was power. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of pain to awaken a lifetime of possibility. Maria's journey of self-discovery didn't stop at finding peace within herself. As the weeks turned into months, she began to channel her emotions into something tangible, something that could not only help her heal, but also inspire others who might be going through similar struggles. Her love for writing, which had always been a quiet hobby, became her lifeline. Late at night, when the city outside her apartment grew silent, Maria would sit by her desk with a cup of tea and pour her heart onto the pages of her journal. At first, her words were raw and unfiltered, a chaotic mix of pain, anger, and hopelessness. But as time passed, they evolved into reflections on resilience, forgiveness, and the beauty of rediscovering oneself. One evening, while rereading her entries, Maria realized that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever felt invisible, dismissed, or betrayed. With trembling hands, she decided to turn her private musings into a memoir, a book that would give voice to those who needed it most. The process of writing Simple Truths was both cathartic and challenging. Some days, Maria found herself crying over memories she thought she had buried. Other days, she laughed at the irony of how far she had come, from being the simple wife cast aside to becoming a beacon of strength and authenticity. She wove anecdotes from her childhood, her early years with Ethan, and the pivotal moments that shaped her transformation. The result was a deeply personal, yet universally relatable narrative about love, loss, and liberation. When Simple Truths hit bookstores, no one expected it to become an overnight sensation, not even Maria. But readers connected with her honesty in ways she never imagined. Women reached out to her through social media, emails, and letters, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and triumph. They thanked her for putting into words what they had struggled to articulate themselves. Book clubs across the country chose Simple Truths as their monthly read, sparking discussions about relationships, self-worth, and the courage to start over. Critics praised its authenticity, calling it a breath of fresh air in a world obsessed with perfection. The success of the book opened doors Maria hadn't anticipated. She was invited to speak at events, share her insights on talk shows, and participate in panel discussions about women's empowerment. At first, stepping into the spotlight terrified her. After all, she had spent years avoiding attention, content to live quietly in the shadows. But as she stood before audiences, speaking from the heart, she realized that her vulnerability was her greatest strength. People weren't drawn to her because she was polished or rehearsed. They were moved because she was real. Ironically, Ethan's life took a sharp downward turn during this period. His impulsive firings at the hotel led to lawsuits from former employees, damaging his reputation further. Investors grew uneasy, questioning whether his leadership style was sustainable. Rumors swirled about marital troubles affecting his focus, and whispers of infidelity tarnished his public image. Despite his attempts to win Maria back with grand gestures, including offering financial settlements and issuing heartfelt apologies, she remained steadfast in her decision to move on. Ethan's desperation became increasingly evident. He showed up at her apartment one rainy afternoon, drenched and pleading for another chance. "I made mistakes, Maria," he said, his voice cracking. "But I still love you. Can we fix this?" Maria looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "It's not about fixing things, Ethan," she replied softly. "It's about understanding that some things can't be fixed, and maybe shouldn't be. You taught me a lot, but the most important lesson came after I walked away. I deserve better than someone who doesn't value me." Her words left Ethan speechless. For the first time, he saw the depth of the damage he had caused, not just to their marriage, but to himself. As he walked away defeated, Maria closed the door behind him and felt a profound sense of closure. This chapter of her life was finally over. With her newfound independence, Maria threw herself into creating meaningful change. She launched a foundation called Rising Roots, dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after personal setbacks. Using proceeds from Simple Truths, she funded scholarships for women pursuing education, hosted workshops on confidence building, and provided resources for survivors of domestic abuse. Her mission was simple: to remind women that they are capable of thriving no matter their circumstances. Through her work with Rising Roots, Maria met countless inspiring individuals who reinforced her belief in the power of community. Among them was Daniel, a kind-hearted teacher who volunteered at one of her workshops. Unlike Ethan, Daniel appreciated Maria for exactly who she was: her simplicity, her warmth, and her unwavering commitment to making a difference. Their friendship blossomed naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect. Though Maria wasn't ready to dive into another romantic relationship, she found comfort in knowing that there were still good people in the world, people who valued connection over status. As spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed. Gone were the days when she defined herself through her role as Ethan's wife. Now she stood tall as Maria Thompson, a writer, advocate, and survivor. She had learned that true happiness came not from external validation, but from embracing who you are and living authentically. One evening, as she watered the plants on her balcony, Maria smiled at the sight of the city lights twinkling below. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, not bound by expectations, regrets, or fears. And in that freedom, she found her greatest strength. Months after the release of Simple Truths, Maria's life had transformed in ways she could never have predicted. What began as a deeply personal project to heal her own wounds had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. Her foundation, Rising Roots, was thriving, and her advocacy work had earned her recognition far beyond what she ever imagined. Yet despite the accolades and attention, Maria remained grounded. She often reminded herself and others that true success wasn't measured by fame or fortune, but by the positive impact one could have on the world. One crisp spring evening, Maria found herself standing backstage at a charity gala hosted by a prominent women's empowerment organization. The event brought together influential figures from various fields: activists, authors, entrepreneurs, all united by a shared mission to uplift and inspire. Maria had been invited to receive an award for her contributions to empowering women through her memoir and foundation. As she adjusted the simple yet elegant dress she wore, she couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come since that fateful night outside the five-star hotel. The host introduced her with glowing words, calling her a beacon of hope and resilience. When Maria stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. For a moment, she stood still, taking in the sea of smiling faces before her. It was surreal to think that just over a year ago she had felt invisible, dismissed, even by those closest to her. Now she stood under bright lights, celebrated not for wealth or status, but for her authenticity and courage. Maria took a deep breath and began her speech, her voice steady and warm. When I first started writing Simple Truths, I didn't do it for recognition, she said, looking out at the crowd. I wrote it because I needed to make sense of my own life, to process the pain, confusion, and heartbreak I had experienced. But along the way, something beautiful happened. Women reached out to me, sharing their stories, telling me they saw themselves in my words. That connection gave me purpose. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. Many of us have been told at some point in our lives that we aren't enough. Not smart enough, not beautiful enough, not successful enough. We've been made to feel small, insignificant, or unworthy. But here's the truth. Simplicity isn't weakness. It's power. Being genuine, kind, and compassionate takes immense strength. And when we embrace who we truly are, without apology, we become unstoppable. The audience listened intently, hanging on her every word. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded in agreement. Maria continued, her tone softening as she spoke, about forgiveness, not for others, but for oneself. Letting go of anger and resentment doesn't mean excusing someone's behavior. It means freeing yourself from the burden of carrying that weight. Forgiveness is a gift you give to your future self so you can move forward with clarity and peace. Her final message was one of hope. Life has a way of surprising us, she said with a gentle smile. Sometimes, the hardest moments lead to the greatest growth. If there's anything I want you to take away tonight, it's this. No matter where you are in your journey, remember that you are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Don't settle for less than you deserve, and don't be afraid to start over if you must, because sometimes starting over is exactly what sets us free. When she finished speaking, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping as Maria graciously accepted the award. Among the attendees sat Ethan Thompson, seated alone at a table near the back. He watched silently, his expression unreadable. Those close to him noted how much he seemed to have aged, his once confident demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Though he tried to convince himself that Maria's success meant nothing to him, deep down he knew he had lost something irreplaceable. The woman who once believed in him unconditionally. For Maria, however, Ethan's presence barely registered. She had moved past the hurt and bitterness, choosing instead to focus on the present and the future. After the gala, she mingled with guests, exchanging hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt conversations. Many thanked her for her words, saying they had reignited their belief in themselves. Others promised to support Rising Roots, eager to contribute to its mission. Later that night, as Maria returned home, she reflected on the evening. The speech, the applause, the connections she had made, it all felt surreal, yet deeply fulfilling. Sitting on her balcony, she gazed up at the stars, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't turned out the way she had planned, but perhaps that was the beauty of it. Sometimes the detours lead to destinations we never knew we were searching for. In the weeks and months that followed, Maria continued pouring her energy into Rising Roots. The foundation expanded its reach, launching new programs and partnerships to empower women worldwide. Maria traveled to conferences, schools, and community centers, spreading her message of resilience and self-worth. Along the way, she grew closer to Daniel, whose kindness and patience provided a comforting presence in her life. While romance wasn't her priority, their friendship blossomed naturally, built on mutual admiration and shared values. As summer approached, Maria celebrated another milestone, the publication of her second book, Bloom Where You're Planted. Unlike Simple Truths, which focused on her personal journey, this book offered practical advice and inspiration for anyone seeking to rebuild their life after adversity. It quickly climbed bestseller lists, cementing Maria's place as a voice of wisdom and encouragement. Looking back, Maria realized that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had found strength in vulnerability, who had dared to rise after falling, who had chosen authenticity over perfection. She understood now that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about learning to grow through it. And though challenges would inevitably arise, she faced them with confidence, knowing she had already proven her ability to overcome. One sunny afternoon, as Maria tended to her garden, a hobby she cherished more than ever, she smiled to herself. The flowers bloomed vibrantly, their colors a testament to nature's resilience. Much like those petals reaching toward the sun, Maria had learned to turn toward light, even in the darkest of times. She was no longer the woman who had walked out of that hotel humiliated and broken. She was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more self-assured. And as she stood there surrounded by beauty and possibility, Maria knew one thing for certain. Her story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.